Hello all and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to dive into something really cool, and that's automating emails from Microsoft Excel using VBA. If you have ever found yourself repeating the same task, copying data, sending the same emails over and over again, whether it is for your status reports or let's say work reports or sharing data with your colleagues, this video is going to be a game changer for you. We are going to explore how you can use Excel and VBA to send those emails through Outlook, automating the entire process. That means no more copying and pasting of email content or even attachments. Imagine sending hundreds of personalized emails at a click of a button. How efficient would that be? Well, it doesn't matter if you have never worked with Outlook from Microsoft Excel before. I will walk you through everything step by step, starting with the basics like setting up references and understanding the Outlook object model. We'll cover the essential things like adding recipients, customizing the email body, attaching files, and of course sending the email. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, whatever you like, and open up Microsoft Excel and let's jump right in. Alright, before we jump into writing VBA code for sending emails, we need to make sure that Excel knows how to communicate with Outlook. This is done by setting a reference to the Outlook object library. Without this reference, our VBA code won't understand what an Outlook application is or how to send an email. Let's walk through how to set this up. I'm already in the VBA editor. If you're unfamiliar with the VBA editor, I recommend checking out my video VBA editor and introduction. Let's insert a module. Next, at the top, click on Tools and then click on References. This will open up a list of available libraries that Excel can use. Scroll through the list until you find something like Microsoft Outlook. Here it is. The version number 16 might be different depending on the version of Outlook you have installed, but it will say Microsoft Outlook Object Library and with a specific number. Check the box next to it. By checking this box, we are telling VBA that we want to use Outlook's functionality in our code. And because of this, VBA will recognize Outlook specific objects like mail item, namespace, application, and others. Now, while we are on the subject of references, this brings us to something called early binding and late binding. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds, and I'll explain more about early and late binding later in the video. For now, we'll stick with early binding, which is better for beginners because of the help you get from IntelliSense, and it's more straightforward to set up. And later in the video, I'll show you how to switch to late binding if you need to. Click on OK. Let's insert a procedure. I'm going to call it sending email. Now that we have set up the Outlook library, it's time to understand how Outlook interacts with VBA. To do that, we need to talk about something called the Outlook object model. So, what is the Outlook object model? Think of the Outlook object model like a blueprint that VBA uses to interact with Outlook. This model defines all the elements like the Outlook application, emails, folders, contacts, etc. that VBA can access and manipulate. Each of these elements is represented by an object in VBA. For example, if you want to send an email, VBA treats that email as a mail item object. If you want to work with your inbox, it treats it as a folder object. And these key objects are all linked together. So they interact like building blocks to help you control Outlook through your code. Let's break down the key objects you'll work with when automating emails using VBA. The first is the application object. The application object is your gateway into Outlook. It represents the entire Outlook application. Whenever you want to start interacting with Outlook, you need to create an instance of the application object. Think of it like opening the front door to Outlook. Without this, you can't see or access anything inside. So let's declare and initialize an object variable which will open that door to us. Here, OLApp represents the Outlook application. And this line of code is telling VBA, hey, open Outlook and get ready to work with it. The next key object that I want to talk about is called the namespace object. After opening Outlook, the namespace object comes into play. This object lets you access all the data in Outlook like emails, folders, calendars, and more. Specifically, you'll be using the getNamespace method to access the MAPI control, which is spelled as MAPI. MAPI protocol is what Outlook uses to handle emails and folders. So think of the namespace as the path to your Outlook data, like opening a file cabinet where all your folders and emails are stored. So we'll not get too much into namespace in this particular video. In the next video, I'm going to cover the namespace object in detail. Moving on, the next key object I want to talk about is mail item object. The mail item object represents a single email. Whenever you want to create or manipulate an email, you'll use this object. You can set properties like the subject, body, recipients, attachments, and more. Think of the mail item as the sheet of paper you're writing an email on. So how do you do that? Dim ol mail as outlook dot mail item. Set ol mail is equal to ol app dot create item ol mail item. Here ol mail is the email object, and create item ol mail item is a method that creates a new email. Once we have our email object, we can start setting its properties with ol mail end with. And here you can set properties like recipient, subject, body, and so on. This is the foundation of working with Outlook in VBA. Understanding how these objects fit together will give you the power to create more complex automation later in this video, like adding attachments, customizing your email body, and much more. Now that we understand the basics of the Outlook object model and how to create an email object, it's time to dive deeper into how we customize the email itself. Specifically, we'll be looking at setting recipients, customizing the email body, setting the subject, and attaching files to an email. By the end of this video, you'll be able to send a complete personalized email with all the elements that we discuss. So let's begin. The first thing you typically do when sending an email is add recipients. In VBA, we have three main properties for this: .to, .cc, and .bcc. The .to property is used to specify the main recipients of the email. It's exactly the same as typing a recipient's email address in the to field in Outlook. The cc field stands for carbon copy. It's used when you want to send a copy of the email to someone, but they are not the primary recipient. The BCC field stands for blind carbon copy. Recipients in the BCC field will receive the email, but their addresses won't be visible to anyone else. This is useful for privacy or when sending an email to a large group. Also, you can add multiple recipients by separating them with a semicolon, just like in Outlook. Here is how you set up the to, cc, and bcc fields in VBA. So .to is equal to, let's say, sid@example.com. .cc is equal to frank@example.com. .bcc is equal to john@example.com. And let's add one more email to this. So we will use semicolon and sydney@example.com. So in this example, the email will be sent to the primary recipient, who is Sid, copied to Frank, and secretly sent to John and Sydney. Sid and Frank will not know that this email was also sent to John and Sydney because their email addresses will not show in the email. Okay, next, let's understand how to customize the email body. After setting the recipients, the next important element is the email body, which is the main content of the email. VBA allows you to set this in two formats: plain text and HTML. Let's cover each of them. The first one is the plain text, which you can set by using .body. If you do not need any fancy formatting, links or images, .body is all that you need. It's simple and straightforward, but doesn't support HTML. For example, .body is equal to, this is a plain text email. Let's see how this email will look like in Outlook. I'm just going to add .display, and I will explain .display at a later stage in the video. So let's run this. So you will see Sid is the primary email recipient, then we have Frank in CC, and John and Sydney are in BCC. And if you look at the body, this is the plain text email. If you want to use HTML to create rich text emails, that is with formatting, links, images, etc., you'll use the .html body. This allows you to include HTML tags, making it similar to what you might create in a web page. Let me give you an example. I'm going to comment this line. So instead of body, we use .html body. Let me quickly write an HTML string and then I'll explain what it does. So here I have certain text in the email and I've used specific formatting tags. For example, I've used the h1 tags to create a header of this text. Then I'm using the b tag for making the font bold. And then I'm using a href tag to insert a link. Let's run this. See how the text is in header. This is bold and we have a link as well. So remember, in .body, you are sending a plain text email. With .html body, you can add HTML elements like headers, paragraphs, bold text and links. You can even insert images by including the img tag within the HTML. If you know how to write HTML code, it's great. But if you do not, then don't worry. If you type text to HTML converter online free in Google, you'll find a lot of sites which will help you with that. Let's take an example. So in Google, type text to HTML converter online free. You'll find a lot of options. Let's go ahead with this. I'm going to delete whatever you have here. Let's start typing. Hi all, please find the report attached. Regards, Sid. And let's change this to paragraph formatting. And let's also insert an image here. To insert an image, use this button. Unfortunately, this particular site does not have a browse button, so you'll have to manually type the source, that is the path and the file name. So let me quickly copy that. /signature.png. Here you can give a brief image description and you can also set the dimensions. Once done, click on OK. Copy this HTML from here. Go back to Excel. This time, instead of pasting it here, what I will do is I will create an HTML variable and I'll store the string in that. HTML is equal to, within quotes, paste the string that you copied from the website. Okay, and let's now format it. Remember, if you find any double quotes in your HTML string, remember to pad it. Let's break this further down. And we are done. Next, take this variable and paste it here. Let's test this. And the email is generated. So we have the email body, we have the signature, but what we are missing is the subject. The subject line is another important part of an email. You can set it using the .subject property. This is straightforward. You just assign a string to the property. So let's see how. .subject is equal to monthly report. Let's run this again. And now we have the subject here. What if you want to now attach a file to this email? VBA makes it easy to attach files to your emails with the .attachments.add method. This method allows you to add any file from your computer to the email. Here's how you attach a file to your email. So you type .attachments.add, and here you will specify the file name. Let's check my desktop. There should be a file there. Yes. So right click on this, properties. This is the path. Let's copy it. It is salesdata.xlsx. Okay. Let's go back to the code and here type the path salesdata.xlsx. So in this example, an XLSX file which is located on my desktop will be attached to the email. Remember, you can attach multiple files by calling .attachments.add multiple times, one below the other. One important thing to note is that the file path should be correct. So always double check the file exists in the location that you are referencing. So now if I run this code, see what happens. We have the salesdata.xlsx attached to the email. Now coming to this .display part. So now you know how to create and customize your emails in VBA. Let's move on to an important part of the process. Deciding what to do with all these emails when it is ready. VBA gives us three main options when working with an email object. .send, .save, and .display. Each of these methods serves a different purpose. So let's break them down and discuss when to use each one. So the first is .send methods. .send. .send is the simplest method, and as the name suggests, it sends the email immediately. When you call .send, Outlook takes the email you have created and places it in the outbox, from where it is sent to the recipients. Now, certain things that you need to understand. .send will send the email directly without any further interaction. Also, use .send when you are confident that your email is ready to go and you do not need to review it or make any changes. This is perfect for fully automated processes where emails are generated and sent without any manual intervention. Also remember, once the .send method is executed, the email is out of your hands. If you realize there's a mistake after calling .send, it's too late to edit or stop the email. So make sure everything is correct. We will not test this code as these email addresses are not real. But in this example, the email is sent immediately after it is created. The next method is .save. .save is used to save the email in the drafts folder without sending it. This can be useful if you want to prepare an email but not send it right away. You can open it later, review it, and send it manually through Outlook, or even reopen it programmatically and send it at a later time. So remember, .save will save the email as draft in the Outlook's draft folder. Use .save when you're automating part of the email creation process but need to review or complete the email later. It is also helpful in situations where you might want to store a batch of emails for later review or manual sending. And yes, the .save method only stores the email. It doesn't send or display it. You'll need to either open the mail manually or use .send or .display to send or view it later. We can test this. Let's go to Outlook for a moment. So you will notice there's nothing in my draft here. Let's go back and let's run this email. If you go back to Outlook, you will see that the email has been saved as draft. Moving on to the third method, which is .display. I've already shown you how this works. So .display is a great option if you want to preview the email before sending it. This method opens the email in an Outlook window, just like if you manually created an email in Outlook, allowing you to review, edit, and manually send it. If you're creating emails in a loop, then do not use this method because this will hog your Windows memory and it'll clutter your taskbar. Use .save instead. This way you can check details manually before sending. Now let's talk about early binding versus late binding. In VBA, there are two ways you can work with external libraries and objects like Outlook: early binding and late binding. Both methods allow you to automate processes in Outlook, but they work in slightly different ways. Let's explore the differences between the two, their pros and cons, and how you can implement late binding if the Outlook library isn't referenced. Early binding is when you explicitly set a reference to an external library like the Outlook object library in the VBA editor before running your code. This method tells VBA upfront what libraries and objects it will need to use. To implement early binding, click on Tools, References, and click on the relevant library, just like we did it at the beginning of this video. And once you set the reference, you can declare specific object types like Outlook.application and Outlook.mail-item, which gives you access to IntelliSense and error checking while writing your code. So the code that we have here is using early binding. There are some pros and cons of early binding. Let's talk about the pros first. VBA will show you autocomplete suggestions for methods and properties, making it easier to write and debug your code. If you make a mistake such as calling a method that doesn't exist, you'll get an error at compile time, which is when you write the code, rather than at runtime when the code is executed. From a performance perspective, since VBA knows exactly which objects it's working with, the code runs slightly faster. Now let's talk about few cons. Early binding requires you to reference a specific version of the Outlook library. If you share your code with someone who has a different version of Outlook, the code might not work properly. Also, you have to manually set up the reference in the VBA editor, which can be inconvenient if you're distributing your code to multiple users. Now let's understand what is late binding. Late binding is when you do not set any external references upfront. Instead, you declare your objects as generic object types and only determine the actual object type at runtime. VBA doesn't know what library or object it will use until the code is running. Instead of referencing the Outlook library, you declare your Outlook objects as object types, and you use the create object function to create them dynamically. Let me insert a module and create a copy of this code, which I will then convert to late binding. Let me first make all the changes in this, and then I will explain what I did. In this example, OL app is declared as a generic object. And then I'm using the create object function, which tells VBA to create an instance of the Outlook application at runtime. Here I have declared the OL mail as an object. So if you compare this code with early binding, look at the image below. You will see the difference. Also, this OL mail item, it's an Outlook constant. Excel doesn't know what is the value of this. So I have declared it on top with a value of 0 because that's the value of this constant. Let's run this code and let's see if it works. And it does. Let's understand the pros and cons of late binding. Since you're not tied to a specific version of Outlook, your code will work regardless of the user's Outlook version as long as Outlook is installed on their system. Also, you do not need to set any references in the VBA editor, which makes it easier to distribute your code without worrying about any missing references. Now let's look at cons. The cons of late binding is exactly the opposite of the pros of early binding. So you won't get the benefit of autocomplete or IntelliSense while writing your code. which can make it harder to remember method names and properties. Errors are only detected at runtime, which means you won't know if something is wrong with your code until it is executed. Also, late binding can be marginally slower because VBA has to figure out which objects to use at runtime, though in most cases the difference is negligible. My favorite way of working is using late binding. Initially, you'll have tough time working with late binding, so my recommendation is to start off with early binding, and once you're done, convert it to late binding. So how do you convert it to late binding? Go back to Tools, References, uncheck the reference, and whatever object variables you have declared, convert them to objects. For example, Outlook application becomes object. Outlook.mail item becomes object. And then instead of using the new keyword, you use create object function. And that's a wrap. I hope you liked the contents of this video and are excited about automating emails from Microsoft Excel and VBA. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Or you can also email me on support@tamexcel.com. I also have a Facebook group, so you can post your questions there as well. Feel free to explain the questions, add screenshots if required, and I'll be more than happy to answer your query. If you really like the way I explain things, and if you would like to extend your support towards this channel, then go ahead, like the video, talk about this channel on different social media platforms, and obviously subscribe to this channel as well. Subscribing will help you out because you'll instantly get an alert when I put my next video up. I would also like to inform you that there's a playlist. You can learn at your own pace. If you're serious about learning Visual Basic Programming from scratch with high quality videos, and that too for free, then go ahead and definitely check out that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, happy coding.